Hopefully everyone can hear me. My name is Sharon Kirschbaum. I am the acting director here at DDOT, and I wanted to introduce my team here with me today. Sandra Marks is our Chief of Transportation Planning. We have Anna Chamberlain, our Associate Director for Planning and Sustainability. I have Michael Alvino. He is our Active Transportation Branch Manager. Ted Van Housen, he is the project lead for the Connecticut Avenue project. So thank you so much for coming to join us today. I know there is just a little bit of interest on this project. We wanted to share tonight an updated concept of DDOT's recommended safety project for Connecticut Avenue. The latest design of the safety project, it extends from Calvert Street up to the district boundary in Chevy Chase. And this goal of the project is, and always has been, to address safety along this high injury corridor. Typically, when we work on corridor projects, we conduct community engagement and share iterations along the way. The iterations are part of our concept development process and are not final designs. So in our prior engagement about Connecticut Avenue, none of the proposed concepts, including Concept C, were fully designed. Concepts are then advanced to further design and refinement and become subject to meeting engineering and design standards, as well as looking at future roadway needs and seeing how it all fits into a future network plan. During our extensive public outreach, we heard concerns about Concept C. Some of those concerns included how narrow the bike lanes would be. Some concerns were about the need for pickup and drop-off zones for dozens of residential and commercial buildings that didn't have surface lots or driveways or garages. Some of the concerns were about the importance of curbside access for street parking in the commercial zones. We also heard about safety concerns from pedestrians that were worried about the design of the bus stops. Others shared concerns about traffic, about whether emergency vehicles could get through easily, and about other operational impacts. And we also heard concerns just about potential impacts on the surrounding neighborhood, streets, that if there's any cut-through traffic, both for people trying to find other ways to get through the city or looking for parking spots. I know there is a lot of divided sentiment on whether or not to add bike lanes to Connecticut Avenue. I believe where we're not divided is in the need to make Connecticut Avenue safer, and we are really committed to making Connecticut Avenue safe for all of its users. I want to just highlight that we recently removed the rush hour reversible lanes in 2021, and we've already seen some great progress in terms of the reduction of crashes and injuries. Between 2019 and last year, Connecticut Avenue actually had 43% fewer crashes and 62% fewer fatalities and injuries. We tend to use 2019 as our baseline year because that's the pre-pandemic traffic patterns and volumes. So our priority is to complete a much needed safety project. The mayor has included additional funding in the FY25 capital budget to do this. Now, I know people who've been tracking this project closely, they looked at prior year budgets and they noted that the original versions, when we were talking about Concept C, had $7.7 million in our budget. That really was just a placeholder. That number never was going to be able to fully fund the cost of a corridor road project. We do now have the full budget that we need to complete this project. As part of the fiscal year 25 budget, Council had initially included a requirement for the installation of bike lanes in any roadway safety work that was done along this Connecticut Avenue corridor, which effectively prohibited DDOT from doing any safety project without, unless bike lanes were installed. As of last week, this provision was removed. So DDOT is now positioned to move forward. This project was envisioned to improve roadway safety for everyone using Connecticut Avenue. I know in recent years, there was a lot of discussion just about the bike lanes, and I want to address this issue head on and just give a little bit of context to explain DDOT's thinking on this. First and foremost, we are always going to focus on our high injury corridor, and we will do road diets as part of those corridor safety projects. There are many ways that we can take advantage of that extra space. When we looked at Concept C, and we're looking at sort of a more specific design, there were a number of challenges. It is a 60-foot curb-to-curb dimension, and the width of the bike lane and buffer would have been well below our minimum standards and would have required design exceptions. And honestly, a project that doesn't meet our minimum standards doesn't deliver the level of safety improvement that we believe is needed along the corridor. We needed to make adjustments. We are committed to building out a remarkable protected bike infrastructure, which recently earned us the recognition of being the second best bike city in the country. I want us to maintain this best-in-class status, and we will. The way we're doing this is through undertaking a 5-year strategic bikeway plan. We have continued over the years to expand our on-street bike network. We are using this study to help direct our work over the next 5 years. And the study is going to look closely at where to expand the low-stress bike network in all wards. We're going to use the bikeway plan to refine and update our Move DC bike priority network. We're going to use data to identify gaps and missing connections that will inform the work plan and reflect the community needs. We hope that the plan will develop then a transparent 5-year bike infrastructure construction work plan that we can share and have readily available for people to track and follow. And we're going to use the plan to inform modal priorities in the next Move DC update. The bike lanes that DDOT designs and builds will be safe and inviting for all levels of cyclists. Now, I am very clear how much interest there is in adding a bike lane to support commuting and localized travel on this corridor. Unfortunately, there is just no perfect solution here that will make everyone happy. We'll explore all options for a Ward 3 bike lane, particularly to get to the north-south connection that we need. And I think we're realistic that the bike lane we end up with will probably not be as direct as people wanted with a Connecticut Avenue bike lane. Tonight, we're going to share our safety project design. And I want to emphasize that we do have resources to move this project forward. I'm going to turn the mic over to Ted. He's going to talk a little bit about how tonight's going to flow and the opportunity to ask questions. We will try to respond to the questions either in writing in the Q&A chat or verbally. Please know we are really looking for project-specific questions. Ted, I'm going to turn it over to you for the next steps.
All right. Thanks, Sharon. So we're going to go through a little bit of how WebEx works, for some, if you may be less familiar with the platform. This meeting is being recorded, and it will be posted on DDOT's YouTube page later this week. And we are currently live streaming on Facebook. As soon as the meeting is over, you can go to our Facebook page and access it. If you have any technical issues during the meeting, please call 202-997-8354 and our staff will be available to assist you. So you cannot share audio or video today. We do have a closed caption option if you need that, and that's how to access that right here. And then in order to send a question, we ask you to use the Q&A feature. And I already see that we've gotten a number of questions already. So some of you have already figured that out. That's great. But that's how you submit a question. We'll be going through the presentation today. And then after the presentation is over, we'll be reading out those questions and then answering them. You may also see our team is also going to be reviewing that during the presentation and may send some responses back to you while the presentation is going on. But and we'll get to as many questions as we can in the time we have allotted. And with that, I will turn it over to Sandra to go through the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Good evening. Thank you all for coming out to learn a little bit more about where we are with this project. Again, I'm Sandra Marks. I'm the Chief Transportation Planner for DDOT. And as the director mentioned, you know, we are working as hard as we can to make sure that we share the information and provide an update on where the project is. And I know that many of you have been following this project for many years. We can go to the next slide. And there may be some new members in the audience. So I wanted to just back up and provide a little bit of context and framing before we get into the details of the current proposal. So Ted, are you able to advance the slide? I want to share that the project goals for this corridor have remained the same over the past number of years. They are on this screen. This is, those of you who have been in our meetings before know that this is a slide that we share at most of our meetings. The three items are reduce vehicular crashes and improve safety for all modes, consider a protected bike lane, and assess the feasibility of removing reversible lane operation. As the director mentioned, we were able to remove the reversible lane operations in 2022, as well as reduce the speed limit from 30 to 25 along the corridor. So that is already in place. I want to just review a little bit of the data to set the context. And if we go to the next slide, we can share a comparison of crashes prior to the reversible, while the reversible lanes were in place, after we removed them, and then we did a follow-up column for 2023 data to understand how those how that impacted and reduced our crashes. So we know that the crashes have gone down, which is a great result, and we know that we have more work to do. The reversible lanes actually, there was a disproportionate percentage of crashes that were occurring during the peak hours when the reversible lanes were in effect. And after we removed them, it was reduced from 46% of the crashes down to 26%. On the next slide, you can see prior to the reversible lanes, when they were in place, this just shows where the crashes were occurring. And you can see those, the larger the blobs or the dots, the more crashes were happening in a particular location. And on the bottom, you can see that while there are notably fewer crashes, they still remain up and down the corridor. And that's something that we want to really talk about tonight. And just for orientation, the left is north and the right side of the screen is south. I want to highlight the different types of crashes that we're seeing. Not all crashes are the same. When we took a look at the crash data on the corridor, we noticed that the majority of crashes were kind of three major categories: left turn crashes, side swipes, and rear ends. And it's important to note, because when we look at different treatments and what types of crashes we're trying to solve, we want to understand what the issues are so that we pick the right safety interventions to improve and to make things safer. So in order to address the 27% of the left turn crashes, we looked at the intersections where we had the highest percentage of, or the highest number of left turn movements. And on the next slide, you'll see that there were 16 locations where we identified left turn lane with a protected phase. So what that means, as you see in the picture on the top right there, it's a lane to pull the left turning vehicles out of the through traffic. They will have their own phase, and those of us that have driven throughout the city understand that you wait until you have your own phase and you're not conflicting with the pedestrians that are going straight. And so what this does is a number of different things. Dedicated left turn lanes can reduce crashes up to 48% by moving those out of the through traffic. It also provides an opportunity for that protected left turn signal phase, which also improves that pedestrian safety. And when you have the left turn lanes, you also improve sight lines, they're offset, and that also helps to reduce some of the crash potential there. One of the other things that those of you who live on the corridor or travel on Connecticut Avenue know or may know, over the past 6+ months, we added some new automated traffic enforcement cameras. And on the next slide, you'll see where those locations are. We have some historical or older red light cameras, but there are 4 new speed cameras that are along the corridor. Those have been installed. Those were installed last fall. We will continue to monitor the tickets that are issued from those locations, one of the things that we look for is a reduction in the number of tickets when we put in a safety improvement. We want to see that number going down to ensure that it's having the desired effect and we're slowing people down along the corridor. But as of today, or in April, the last time we checked, there's still a significant number of tickets being issued, which tells us that we know that there are still some issues out there that we need to address with this project. In addition, there are a number of uncontrolled pedestrian crossings on the corridor, primarily on the northern section. Again, the left is the north. And we are looking at identifying safety enhancements to either signalize or upgrade those, because we know that crossing 6 and ultimately 4 lanes of traffic at an uncontrolled location such as Connecticut is not the safest condition. So that will also be an element of this project. And that's consistent with what we had in the previous concept C as well. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. One, most of the things that I've just outlined, the left turn signals, the uncontrolled pedestrian crossing treatment, some of the things that were not in the slides, but we're also looking at some of the slip lanes, which are uncontrolled right turns we have at Nebraska and some of the other intersections. Those elements and upgrading those safety features are also part of this concept. So those remain as they were in the previous concept and in where we are now. So as the director shared earlier, the concept stage is where we lay out the vision and we refine it and go into engineering and design, and then we understand a little bit more about what that cross section will look like. So on the next slide, just as a reminder for those of us who may not be directly on the corridor, today Connecticut Avenue is a 60-foot curb to curb cross section that has 6 10-foot lanes. In the peak hour, there's no parking allowed on the corridor, which means that there are 3 travel lanes northbound and 3 travel lanes southbound. These are 10-foot lanes. We have buses that travel along this corridor, and the minimum that we require is an 11-foot. So this is currently, and that's just because those are wider vehicles. That gives a little bit more buffer. And you also saw that there were side swipe. It was one of the big crashes that were happening, and that's because of the compacted cross section. Some of the other challenges that when there are left turns, anybody who is behind that left turning vehicle, because we don't have dedicated left turn pockets, they have to wait and get backed up behind those vehicles. And again, we have 6 lanes of crossing, which is not ideal for pedestrians as well. And so the project goals, regardless of the bike lanes, was to address as many of these issues as we can. So if we go to the next section, I will show you in this concept the cross section that we're proposing for a section that does not have that left turn pocket. So you can see, looking across, we have a narrower outside lane for parking in order to accommodate that 11-foot travel lane for the transit vehicles, and then 2 10-foot lanes on the inside. And what that looks like in plan view, just to give you an idea of how that would lay out. If we could go to the next slide. You can see on the left, it shows you as you're approaching the intersection what that looks like, and where we're able to, we are including curb extensions, which do a few things. One, what we call daylights the intersection, so the pedestrians are visible as they're waiting to cross the road. It also allows a 4-lane section, a shorter section to cross. And in the areas where we have bus stops, it allows us to put the shelter infrastructure there and to allow the buses to stop and use that curb extension as for the bus operations. On the next slide, we'll show you what it looks like where we have the left turn lane. So again, we have keeping that 60-foot dimension on the top. We narrow in the curb. And then you have an 11-foot travel lane in the outside lane, which accommodates that transit vehicle. And then you have those 3 10-foot lanes, one of which becomes the left turn lane. And again, in plan view, being able to look at that on the next slide, you'll see on the right is where we have that left turn lane, and the taper or how long the storage is varies depending on the amount of left turning vehicles. And on the right, sorry, that's on the right, and on the left, we have that dimension where we don't have a left turn on the opposing side, but we do take that dimension and use that for a pedestrian refuge so that folks can cross in two sections if they need to, and it also breaks up that right of way. Again, in this scenario, we have curb extensions, and those also can accommodate the bus stops in this scenario. So moving to the next slide, we just want to give you an idea of what this might look like. This is not intended to be any particular intersection, but you can see that we pull in the intersection, tighten it up to get those 4-lane crossings instead of what you're crossing today, which is 6 lanes. And in the foreground, I think maybe that's the foreground, you can see that there's parking accommodated once you get past the curb extensions. And the next slide just shows you what that might look like with a left turn lane. So you'll see on the closer section, you've got that left turn lane and it's a protected signal so that they're not making a left turn when the pedestrians have the light to go straight across. And then you can see, it's a little hard to see, but we'll post these on the website afterwards. You can take a look and see what this looks like as a rendering. I want to acknowledge that there's been a lot of discussion about the bicycle facilities and how we will accommodate that. As Sharon mentioned, we are going to be embarking on a 5-year strategic bikeway plan. We know that there are fewer facilities in Ward 3 than elsewhere, and we want to make sure that we are using this as an opportunity to build out the network. We have spent a lot of time trying to learn from the facilities that we've put out to date. We want to make sure we can identify the best and the safest configuration, both for Connecticut Avenue, but also for bicyclists who want to get and travel through the ward and through the district. If you go to the next slide, the 5-year strategic bike plan is going to be really focused on looking at data to identify where the gaps are, where the desired origins and destinations are, what the missing connections are to inform our 5-year work plan and really reflect the greatest need to build out the network. And then this plan will also feed into an update to our Move DC plan, looking at all of our modal priorities, bike, bus, freight, high injury network, and make sure that we are reconciling all of those and making sure that we have an actionable work plan. On the next slide, I'll just give you a little bit of an overview of the timeline and what some of our next steps are. I'll share that earlier this afternoon, we met with the Community Advisory Committee, and we will continue to work with them to map out some additional community engagement. We want to make sure that we're sharing this information and that we're re-engaging. We acknowledge that there's been a lull in some of our public-facing activity, and we want to make sure that we are re-engaging with the community. We're going to be updating the website to make sure that this new information is up there. You'll be able to see a recording of this presentation and the deck and some additional information. And we're going to be refining a timeline and a path forward. The next phase is, as with most of our capital projects, right? We're hoping to finalize the concept. We move into a design phase, and then we can move into construction. As the director mentioned, the proposed budget has funding for construction dollars in FY 26 and 27, and we hope to be able to meet that timeline. In terms of the 5-year strategic bikeways plan, we are working to update that website, and we are working to finalize our scope and onboard a consultant so that we can launch in the coming months, and we'll come back out to the community. There will be significant public engagement starting sometime in the fall. So with that, I want to just move to the next section, which is really our question and answers. We're sure that there's a lot of interest and a lot of questions. I wanted to recognize that Council Member Fruman has joined us this evening. and I'm hoping we can elevate him to the presenter panel so that he'll have an opportunity to kick us off with his questions before we open it up to the public. And again, you're welcome to, I know there's been a lot of activity in the Q&A box, and we will be monitoring those so we can respond to some of your questions. So when the council member appears, we will give him a moment to ask his questions.
There I am. Thank you very much. I'm not going to opine about the merits or demerits of this proposal at this point. I think you'll hear from lots of folks. I will hear from lots of folks. I am trying to understand where we are in this process, and some of it you got at the last slide when you talked about schedule. But help me understand. Obviously the big question is bike lanes, whether to include bike lanes or not, and what is going to happen in terms of bicycle transportation in Upper Northwest. And that is a high priority for many of us. And I'm trying to understand what this means in terms of that. And one of the things that you talked about was this broader bikeway plan, and that it would kick off in the fall. But what is your target for when we would see recommendations for what the next generation of bike infrastructure would be? And maybe even most specifically, what are your ideas for north-south bike lanes in Upper Northwest? It starts in the fall, but when will we see suggestions?
Thank you for the question, Council Member. We are actively, as I mentioned, in the kind of gearing up phase, and our anticipation is that we will have a consultant in place for the fall. We'll have a full team that will be working with us and our excellent staff to kick this off. So we anticipate starting that public engagement in the fall. We anticipate it'll be a fairly robust 12 to 18 months. So there will likely be key milestones along the way, but where our goal is to have recommendations in either late 2025 or early 2026, so that we'll be able to work with the community through those. But there will be lots of opportunities along the way.
Late 2025 or early 2026. Okay, and then on this project, if this project were to proceed, and you talked a little bit about this, about it, the concept development phase and then a procurement phase. Can you be specific about how long you think you will be spending on a concept development phase, and then when it turns to a design phase, and then when it becomes a construction project? How are you seeing that timing?
Sure. Our goal would be to finalize the concept this year. As we all know, the key factors that could delay some of that are procurement. Often can take longer than we anticipate, and of course, if there's additional iterations or larger community engagement efforts that we are that may affect that schedule. Once we move to the design phase, again, there's a procurement. This is a fairly significant 3+ mile corridor. That would take generally about 18 months, we approximate. And then again, for the construction, as I mentioned, the funding is available in FY26 and 27. And the goal would be to meet that time frame. And depending on the phasing of the construction plan, could be anywhere from 18 to 24 months.
So so if the concept was completed by the end of this year, and then you had an 18-month design period, that would take you to June of 2026.
There's a procurement in there, so there are a few months in there, but we generally try to do that as concurrently as possible. So as we're approaching the end of the concept, we can move into, but yes, generally, yes.
So middle of 2026, and then you would then the idea would be to do a procurement for construction. And when you say starting in FY26, FY26 ends in September of 2026. So you'd be coming in the second half of 2026 that you might be starting construction if everything went smoothly.
Yes, and our goal over the next couple of months, in addition to refining the concept, is to get a little bit more certainty around that timeline so that we can share that with both you and of course, the community.
Okay. And then, so one of the things that is very tricky here is that, and you've heard me refer to a player to be named later, you have this bikeway plan that you'll be doing that's supposed to lead to recommendations sometime in the middle of 2026. And then construction on this could be procured and perhaps launched in the middle of 2026. What happens if in that period where you're looking at potential bike infrastructure, including in Upper Northwest, if you once again concluded that Connecticut Avenue was the most appropriate place to put a bike lane, how could you pivot in that situation? What could you do in terms of, at that point, moving to incorporating a bike lane, or if you've already done the construction, modifying the construction so that you could add a bike lane? How do we deal with the fact that we haven't really come up with an alternative for a bike lanes in Upper Northwest that, and we may do construction on the one place that people have to date thought was the most natural place? What's your flexibility to pivot down the line?
Yeah, so you're right that Connecticut is the straightest shot, and that's why it was an obvious place to start. And unfortunately, we weren't able to make it happen with this project. If we were to come back after we do our study and we look at a number of different alternatives, if it was determined that there was a neighborhood route that made sense, we could pursue something like that. If it was determined that Connecticut indeed does make sense and we could find some additional money to widen that 60-foot curb to curb, which really has been a limiting factor, we would come back and we would work with council and the community to see if we could identify a path forward. But we just don't know the answer yet.
So, I mean, if you came to the conclusion that no, Connecticut is the most natural place to put this, in theory, you could pivot, but you would need additional dollars. And I mean, would you have to tear out things that you already put in?
We try to be as efficient as we can. Yes, if we have bulb outs, those would need to either be modified, and there are plenty of communities where they put down, a slit through there and continue a bike lane to accommodate that. Or it could be a scenario where we would have to do a little bit of reconfiguration. But there's certainly options that we would have to look at.
So I'm going to just two more. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just want to add one quick clarification, Councilmember, to your question. You were asking about the timeline of the plan and construction. I just want to make sure it's clear that we are not going to just be sitting on our hands in terms of building out the bike network until then. So we have about 10 miles of new bike lanes that are planned for this fiscal year. We plan to build probably about another 10 in FY25. So we'll still be working on projects while we're doing the study. It sort of sounded like this study was going to take a long time and we'd be waiting to do anything until then. We're still working on construction in the interim.
No, I hear you, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. I think that, I mean, the focus here is about North, South, and Upper Northwest, but I hear you on that. Two last things, and then there's a lot of people out there who have questions, and I'll stop. Am I right that given the new structure, a cyclist on Connecticut Avenue would have to be in one of the traffic lanes? Right now, there's the 3 lanes, and I think cyclists often are in the far right lane where there's less traffic. But am I right if this went through? And we want it to be safer for everybody, but I'm trying to understand safety for each of the different users, including cyclists. Am I right that the expectation would be that cyclists would be in traffic?
So in the areas where bicyclists are allowed to ride in the roadway, except for limited access. So the way they do today, they can ride in the roadway if they're comfortable. In the sections where sidewalk riding is allowed, that's another option for them. Obviously, it's not in the central business district and more crowded areas, but yes, they would be allowed to continue to ride in the road as they do today.
Okay, and then I'll stop. But the last thing is an observation, and it's an observation that I made in a couple of different letters to the mayor, is that what's happening here is that we will be narrowing the road to 2 lanes of traffic in both directions, giving a road diet, which was always in the cards. That was the goal of this project from the start. But to the extent that there have been people who've been concerned about slowing traffic going to downtown or slowing traffic in a way that might lead to diversions into the neighborhoods, this plan is the same as Concept C, which also included the left turn lanes. And so to the extent that that may have been an objection to including a bike lane, I don't think this solves that because it was always the goal to slow traffic going downtown. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, that's correct. This is 2 lanes in each direction with left turn pockets at key intersections, which maintains those 2 through lanes. We don't have to worry about getting stuck behind a left turning vehicle, and we don't have to worry about, going around the 2 cars that forgot to move their car in the morning. And I'll just add that, the data tells us that road diets make it safer for all users, and crashes are reduced when we introduce a road diet.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I will stop. My observation is that it's not different than Concept C. Those things were already built into the ideas behind Concept C. But with that, thank you very much, and let's hear from, I'm sure I and you will be hearing from many people, and I look forward to hearing from folks.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask the behind the scenes team to, I'm assuming that there will be kind of buckets of questions, and hopefully we can tackle some of those. And we apologize in advance. I guarantee we will not be able to get to every single question, but we will share our email address and let you know that we will absolutely be happy to follow up, and there will be other opportunities moving forward. But with that, Ted.
Sure. So the first question that we have is, do the new traffic enforcement cameras operate 24/7? Ask because during the night hours, there are frequently cars that treat the roadway between Porter and Cathedral like a drag strip and go speeding down the road. Are those cars automatically flagged even though the police do not give chase?
And Ted, I can answer that. And I just, I don't know if people could hear we're a little quiet and a little bit muffled, but the question was about whether the traffic enforcement cameras operate 24/7. And yes, that is one of the things that make traffic enforcement really robust and easy, is because they are on 24/7. They don't turn off at nighttime. We do recalibrate them on a monthly basis, but they are fully operational full time. And yes, tickets get sent, so the police are not giving chase.
Thanks. Next question. How does the plan make intersections safer for pedestrians with visual and mobility disabilities? Not having bike lanes is a positive step for the safety of disabled pedestrians.
Yeah, so there's a number of different things that we're doing along the project that are consistent with the previous concept. We think that narrowing the crossing is a huge benefit. We will be having pedestrian refuges in a number of different locations. We will be upgrading some of the crosswalks that are currently unsignalized and uncontrolled, and we are optimistic that this will really be a benefit to some of our pedestrians and particularly vulnerable road users. So we'll be upgrading all of that infrastructure to meet all of our ADA guidelines.
Thanks. Next question. You assess the impacts of traffic and congestion on left-hand turn lanes. So does the average travel time increase as left-hand turn lanes are added? And if so, by what amount of time?
You're putting me on the spot here. I don't have all of the details in the traffic study, but we can absolutely. There is some follow-up information. We've looked at some of that information. There's two resources that I would reference. One, there's a full traffic study that's available on the project website, and I'll ask somebody from the project team to put that in the chat so folks can go ahead and take a look at that. And we can make sure that we have some of that information on our website about travel time through the corridor, which we have. I just don't have it at my fingertips, so I apologize.
Next question. I live along the 34th Street, Reno Road, 41st Street path. This stretch has a heavy vehicle burden with little to no traffic calming. I have anecdotally witnessed over the years how vehicle intensity in the stretch increases when there is heavier congestion on Connecticut. How will DDOT ensure that the safety problems DDOT is trying to solve on Connecticut are not transferred to 34th Street, Reno Road, and 41st Street?
Yeah, one of the things that we've been talking about for quite some time with the different earlier versions of the project as well is making sure that we are being comprehensive and looking at some of the neighborhood connections. We know that there are some more desirable routes than others, and making sure that we are proactive. If there are interventions that make sense to put on some of those attractive routes, that we do that in conjunction with the project. So we will absolutely continue to take a look at that as we go through the planning process.
Okay. Next question. 2 intersections require traffic lights at Chesapeake and Ellicott intersecting with Connecticut. Both include adults and children. Ellicott nearest a school, safety is an issue. The Hawk is not best for children, it is a concern. So concerns about pedestrian safety, especially for children at Chesapeake and at Ellicott.
Yeah, we'll definitely go back and take a look and make sure that we have the right intervention. But we'll take a note of that, and we'll have the design team look into that a little bit more carefully.
Okay. Okay, next question. Biking in DC is growing in popularity, with Capital Bike Share hitting record numbers. Bikers will continue to use Connecticut Avenue whether drivers like it or not. How do you plan to keep cyclists, drivers, and pedestrians safe without dedicated bike facilities?
I'm going to actually ask Michael or Anna to jump in on this one. I know that there's been record Capital Bike Share usage and growth, and we are super excited to see, how successful that program is and has been. But Michael, if you have any, if you want to jump in on that one, anything to add?
Yeah, not a whole lot to add. I think the expansion of our Capital Bike Share system, has continued. We've really seen it be a robust sort of complement to private bicycle usage, but also the transit system. And so, I think it's something that, we're continuing to look at, and something that we'll look at in the strategic plan. That Capital Bike Share ridership provides us with a lot of great data, and we're certainly seeing a lot of usage all throughout the city, record-breaking usage, but also in Ward 3 as well.
Next question, let me just pull that up real quick. Okay, pull that up. Sorry, I lost our. Apologies. I had it. Okay.
I think I see it.
Oh yeah, thank you.
And there was a question about looking at data as something that DDOT will apply to find a new north-south route. And really, it's looking at how we do the strategic bike plan and looking at the network is where we're talking about using data. And how does that change the data that DDOT previously looked at, and what data came up that showed that Connecticut Avenue is not the right place for a north-south bike route. And so again, and I'd love either Sandra or Anna to talk about the how we're going to frame the strategic bike plan. But keep in mind, we have typically talked about a project. We talked about Connecticut Avenue as a project. What we're trying to do now is to look at the entire bike infrastructure network and design it so that we can ensure that we have all the segments needed. So it's really, we should be looking at our bike network in the same way that we look at our transit network and we look at our freight network and look at it more comprehensively, and not just, hey, we're doing a project here, so let's build a bike lane. But in terms of the nature of the data for the planning effort, I'm going to defer to either Sandra or Anna on that.
Yeah, I'm actually going to ask Michael to jump in on that. I know he's been doing a lot of the background work to get ready for that plan.
Yeah. So, you know, as far as the data goes, you know, I think it's really two things. You know, there's a lot of new data sources. I mentioned the capital bike share data, but, you know, we're able to get a lot of data sources from what they call big data now. But we're not just looking at that. You know, honestly, we're going to be doing a citywide public outreach plan. And I'm sure a lot of you who are here tonight, you know, maybe have questions about, you know, the participation in that process, given how this has gone. But really, we want to be making an equal part of, you know, the public input, and then relying on sort of the hard data. So it's both a quantitative and a qualitative input that will really help us decide. And it's not so much about where the future bike routes are going to go, although that's obviously a part of it, but how do we prioritize what happens next versus what, you know, happens 3 years from now or 4 years from now or 5 years from now. And so some of that analysis will be looking at, you know, things like access to destinations, how many grocery stores and schools are within, you know, a quarter mile or half world-class, high-quality bicycle facilities. And that's really where we want to be focusing our resources. So it's access to destinations, it's directness. We've got a lot of questions here. I'm trying to get to them. But there was a question about, you know, someone made the point that Connecticut Avenue is a straight shot and there's no hills. So those are the kind of things that that we're also going to be looking at as well.
So thanks for that. Our next question is, I live along Connecticut Avenue and had participated in DDOT previous projects. I'm sad to see the reversal on Concept C. The bike lanes would have kept my kids safer as they bike to the library. What will DDOT be doing to regain the trust of the neighborhood in this new revised plan?
I can, you know, we acknowledge that we have, this is not the plan that folks had been marching forward towards. So we acknowledge that. We are committed. We have an amazing team and we have clear guidance on where we're trying to get. We are focused on making Connecticut Avenue, which is a high injury network, as safe as we can for all users. And we know that road diets benefit everyone, including bicyclists. It's not a dedicated lane. That is true. And we are committed to continue working to find those connections to help people get to where they're trying to go.
Yeah, and I want to add, I know that people were very excited. I know there's disappointment. And we are going to continue to build out our bike network, and it's going to be amazing. We have a great network now, and we're not going to slow down. So I acknowledge the frustration that people are feeling, but you're going to see. I just know you're going to see where we land, and we will build back the trust.
Thank you. Next question, and this is another one about left turns. Are left turns allowed during rush hour on Connecticut Avenue?
I think I'm going to defer to some of the others, but I believe at some of the locations they are prohibited and some locations they're allowed. And that's why you often see the backups that happen when people are trying to find the gap to make that left turn. So we, in addition to the safety, we think operationally those left turns are really going to help keep those two through lanes moving while the folks are pulled out to wait for their left turn signal. But those of you that live and work out there can probably tell me block by block where the restrictions are.
Thank you. Next question. The 5-year strategic bike lane plan. Where does the community fit in with this plan?
Yeah, I think Michael, do you want to jump in on the community engagement?
Yeah, I think I spoke about this a little bit earlier, but we expect, community engagement to be a really big part of this. We really want to get feedback, not just on where we're building the routes, but what type of routes, is it going to be prioritizing building, things in permanent concrete, things that are going to cost us more money, and maybe that means we have to do fewer bike lanes, but they're really high quality, world class. Or is it really focused on building out the network and expanding it to areas where it doesn't go? And we want to be, if you've got a community group and you're interested in hosting us for a meeting sometime next year, those are the kind of things that we're going to be interested in. We're going to be hosting public meetings, hosting pop-ups, as well as, providing a lot of different ways to get community feedback, so that there really is a specific role in sort of our yearly work plan that's informed by the community.
Thank you. The next question is about parking. So will we lose parking? If so, how much parking is lost? How does parking compare between what's out there today, how much was in concept C, and how much is in the plan you're presenting today? Can you talk more about parking on Connecticut Avenue?
Sure. So I think we've already put in the chat, and if we haven't, we will, just a comparison between the different scenarios, and I will just look for that real quick. So, and these are approximations, right? Not all of the spaces are painted. Today out there are approximately 680 parking spaces. And concept C, that number went down to closer to 260, 275. And in what we're proposing now, and again, it hasn't been laid out along the whole corridor, we anticipate that there would remain about 500 to 550 parking spaces.
Thank you. The next question I have is, what about the Move DC bike plan? Don't you already have a plan to expand bike infrastructure in the district? And how will Move DC and the strategic bike plan work together?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think one of the reasons that we decided that it was really important to do the strategic bike plan is that while the Move DC map, which if you haven't seen, we can drop it in the chat, is very extensive and is wide-reaching and is not prioritized. So we were directed by the mayor. We had a very ambitious goal of trying to get in 10 bike lanes, protected bike lanes a year, which we have met consistently. But now that we've kind of done a big push, we want to be strategic about where we go next. We want to make sure that we are not putting in bike lanes that don't connect to existing infrastructure now that we have such a robust network. We want to make sure that we are being mindful. I think I've heard from in an earlier conversation about equity and areas that don't have bike infrastructure that either are car dependent, have lower car ownership, are transit dependent, and making sure that we have a roadmap of where we're going to go next. So this strategic bike plan will be a shorter term and will really be the basis to help us build out our work plan and tell us where we go next based on those key connections and priorities. So that's the difference between the long range bike plan, which is is not prioritized, and a more strategic, targeted, where do we go next?
Thank you. Next question. Okay, so related to the diversion question, will DDOT be placing any increased priority on traffic calming measures on intersecting neighborhood streets, particularly those streets that connect from Connecticut Avenue to Broad Branch Rock Creek Parkway and from Connecticut to Reno Road? Can any of this traffic calming be implemented in advance of the construction beginning on Connecticut Avenue?
Yeah, that's exactly the way that we want to think about it. And as I mentioned earlier, we want to be strategic about anticipating where those desired cut-through patterns might be, and coming up with an approach to identify the key locations for that traffic calming within the neighborhood, and make sure that that's in place before the project is in place, so that we can help protect those neighborhoods from those unintended consequences.
Thank you. Next question. Let's see. Okay. Opponents of Concept C said that reducing driving lanes to 2 in each direction would make it impossible for emergency vehicles to get through. This plan, however, has 2 lanes in at each intersection. Do we need 3 full lanes of driving in order to ensure emergency vehicle access?
If you look around the city, we've got 1 lane roads, 2 lane roads, 4, 6, and we have to be able to serve our community, whether there's a fire or a medical emergency. Having 2 lanes in each direction is a great scenario, because as we've all driven around the city, if there's traffic in 1 lane, you can cross the double yellow line. But we don't see, in conversations with our partners in emergency response, we have not had any issues with 2 lane roads, with 4 lane roads, I should say. And Sharon, I don't know, you've been more engaged in some of those conversations.
Yes, that was not a concern that we've had, and our fire EMS partners.
All right, thank you. Next question. Have you considered moving bus stops to the far side to enable the creation of left turn lanes that won't back up into a travel lane? Specifically, I'm thinking of Connecticut and Porter.
Yes, we actually, as part of this plan, we'll be looking at all of the bus stop locations. Our best practice is to make sure that those are on the far side, so that folks aren't darting out in front. It's a safer condition for them to cross. And so we will use this as an opportunity to look at where the bus stops are located, and if we can have the opportunity to move them to the far side.
Thanks. Next question. Did DDOT consider, instead of left turn lanes, the possibility of simply banning left turns altogether? Other cities do this, and it improves traffic flow and safety at little to no cost, and could utilize what would have been a dedicated left turn lane for buses or cyclists or pedestrians.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look. I know there were a number of scenarios early in the process that were looked at. We can go look at the traffic study, and again, we'll make sure that you all have the link if you want to, cozy up and have some late night reading. But yeah, I know that lots of communities have chosen to do that. I'm not sure that's the right fit. That's the right fit for this scenario, but happy to share that information as well.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was just going to jump in. Can we ask Michael, are you able to just talk a little bit about some of the recent bicycle facilities? I know there were some questions about some of the more recent facilities that were put in across the district and in Ward 3.
Yeah, I've seen a couple questions specifically in Ward 3. Earlier, well, I guess it was late last year, we completed protected bike lanes on New Mexico Avenue, northwest, just over a mile of protected bike lane. Right now, we're currently under construction on Arizona Avenue, northwest protected bike lanes, and those will ultimately eventually connect to the Capitol Crescent Trail. We've also got projects in Ward 3 planned moving along with potential construction later this year on 44th and Jennifer Street Northwest, as well as next year on Western Avenue Northwest. So that's sort of just a small thing that we have planned, you know, within the next 18 to 24 months within Ward 3. And then citywide, you know, we've still got a very robust protected bike lane program, over 2 miles of protected bike lane on 17th Street Northeast and Mount Olivet Road Northeast that we're very excited about. And just continuing on many of the great projects that we have. As Sandra mentioned earlier, you know, our goal is still 10 miles of protected bike lanes per year. We're on track to meet that this year, and we hope to meet that again next year.
Thank you. Next question. How are scooters considered within the bike network and Connecticut Avenue planning process? Scooters are a popular choice of commuters and should also be taken into account in these discussions.
You know, scooter and e-bikes have really taken off across the district. Part of why we've seen such great growth with Capital Bike Shares because we've introduced about 1,000 new e-bikes, and we know that they're very popular as well as the scooters. They just provide another alternative for folks to get around. We will be, you know, we're updating our thinking. We're looking at our standards to ensure that we can accommodate all of these new and innovative uses and whatever's kind of coming down the pike. But we're always thinking about all of those modes as we do our planning, and that's no different than in this case.
Great, thanks. We got a question about websites for our bike plans. Where can we find those? What's included on those websites? And when can we expect an update on those?
I know that Michael and his team have been actively, you know, working closely to get that live, and we are hoping that that will be live in the coming weeks or months, so that you'll really be able to have a one-stop shop and a clear visibility into our work plan, where we're going next, what's coming down, and then of course as we go through, as we start engaging on the strategic bike plan, that'll be, you know, that's where we'll kind of direct people with all of the information and resources. So keep an eye out, and we will certainly get the word out when it's live.
Great. So the next question, and this is about a project I actually worked on. In the Van Ness area, Connecticut Avenue and Van Ness Street were slated for streetscape improvements to support the commercial corridor. Can and will those previously planned and previously unfunded streetscape improvements be integrated into the Connecticut Avenue project? This would reduce the cost of advancing two separate projects independently and would eliminate the prospect of business and residents having to deal with two separate disruptive construction projects.
Yeah. Ted, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, sure. So we have we had a project looking at the Connecticut Avenue streetscape. It was between the curb line and the building face, so not the roadway of Connecticut Avenue, but the sidewalks and the areas of the public space in front of the buildings for Connecticut Avenue. And then it also looked at Van Ness Street from Connecticut Avenue all the way to Reno Road. What the recommendation was in that project was to, on Connecticut Avenue, to improve the streetscape, to provide a 10-foot wide, at least, as much as possible, clear sidewalk path on each side of the street. And then in some cases, there are really wide sidewalks on Connecticut Avenue in the Van Ness commercial corridor. And we are kind of reducing, actually taking out some of that hardscape and adding in some planters and green space to soften the area and make it friendlier for pedestrians. So that's part of that project. And then on Van Ness Street, there is that on Van Ness Street includes the roadway. So on that, it's expanded sidewalks for that. It's a protected bike lane on Van Ness Street. So I think earlier there was a question about connections to Connecticut Avenue. So this project would provide that. And we're happy to integrate that in with this project as far as further design and implementation.
All right, thank you, Ted, and thanks for the questions. Sorry, they're coming in quick, and we really do want to stay focused on specific questions. So I think we got the big ones that were really about what this new design is going to be. We have a project mailbox, so people wanted to follow up. conav.multimodal@dc.gov. That's CONNAVE, no hyphens. .multimodal@dc.gov. Feel free to send us questions that we didn't have a chance to answer today. Thank you again for all of your time this evening. And we look forward to continue to keep the community updated as the project advances. Have a great evening. Good night.
Thank you.